I'm Miranda, and this is my great-grandmother. This is also my great-grandmother, laughing her head off, as she was frequently seen doing. My grandmother was one of those people that loved life. She was my maternal grandfather's mother. She loved life, and she loved the people in her life. And the way she showed us that she loved us was by feeding us. And when I say feeding us, I mean feeding us with a capital F-E-E-D-I-N-G. When you'd go to her house, her little laminate counter or her little laminate table in her kitchen would be just loaded down with fried chicken and macaroni and cheese and mashed potatoes and homemade green beans from her garden. And this is what she did every time anyone came to visit her. Chicken and noodles was one of her other specialties. And I was lucky enough to have her in my life until my late 20s. That's when she passed away. I was 29. But in the time that I had her, she taught me a lot of very valuable lessons. And one of them was, when you love people, you cook them food. She also taught me how to make chocolate zucchini cake, which is what I'm going to share with you today. You will need 1/2 cup of butter, or oleo if you're kicking it old school. I am not kicking it old school. I don't buy margarine anymore. 1/2 cup of oil. Again, I'm using sunflower oil. My grandmother typically would have used vegetable oil. Either of them will work. A teaspoon of vanilla. The recipe calls for 2 eggs. I am going to be using 3 because my eggs are kind of small compared to commercial grocery store eggs. You need 1 cup and 3/4 cup sugar. I will probably use a combination of white and brown to give it more of a richness. I don't use a lot of white sugar when I'm baking because I like the added flavor of the brown sugar. Those are the items we will be creaming together. In addition to that, you're going to need 2.5 cups of flour. Baking powder and baking soda. Cinnamon, which is required. Nutmeg, which is optional. Cocoa, which can be delicious. 3 cups of zucchini, shredded. We hope that this is enough zucchini. The grocery store the pickup kind of shorted me. You also can add a cup of chocolate chips and a cup of walnuts. They're optional. They are also delicious. So we will be including them. You can make this in a straight square baking pan, but we're gonna get fancy. And we're gonna use my new Nordic Ware bundt pan. It's a small 6-cup bundt pan, which should leave me with enough batter to make an extra cake for my neighbors, because that's how I roll. So one of the things I like to do when I'm making a cake or other baked good is I like to sift all of my dry goods together so that you get a nice homogeneous mix of flour, cocoa, baking powder, baking soda, etc. One of the most disgusting things that can happen to you when you're eating a baked good is like bite into a scone or a cookie or a cupcake and get that clump of baking soda. You know what I'm talking about. It's probably happened to you. It is just you're eating, and then all of a sudden there's this cognitive dissonance of sweet, oh my God, what is that? So we're going to try to avoid that. And we're going to do that by first measuring out all of the dried goods and then sifting them together. We're going to measure everything into this nice 4-cup Pyrex mixing cup, and then we are going to sift into my white mixing bowl. One of the things about my grandma, which was really funny, is that she never leveled things off. She just kind of just did them, and I was like, okay, I am more of a leveler than my grandma was. But I'm not a stickler. And then, because I'm a stickler for this kind of thing, you do it again. Sometimes you get stuck to the sides and you kind of need to give it a good shake. You have a nice mixture of dry stuff, which will be easily incorporated into our creamed stuff. So one of the first things you need to do when making a cake after mixing up your dried goods is to start creaming your butter or oleo if you're my grandma. So I just added all the sugar. I did 1 cup of white and 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. I added it in little intervals so that it could incorporate, could incorporate slowly into the sugar that is being creamed. Periodically, it's a good idea to scrape your beater so that it does not get clogged. Something my mom taught me: clean as you go. butter and sugar have creamed together, you add the oil. Then you're going to want to add the oil, and then you're going to want to add the 3 eggs. I always do this too, because when I was a little girl, my mother accidentally got a fertilized egg into a giant batch of Mexican wedding balls, and I don't want that to happen. Not that I have a rooster to fertilize eggs, but it's just one of those things. I've always cracked my eggs into something else. Now we add the buttermilk. This is a good time to scrape the beater and make sure that everything is incorporated nicely, because we're going to start adding the dry goods here in a second. This is a good time to scrape the beater and make sure that everything is incorporated nicely, because we're going to start adding the dried goods here in a second. When everything's all nice and creamy, get a little closer shot there of what it looks like. We're going to start incorporating the dried goods about a cup at a time. Again, just kind of eyeball it. Slow and steady wins the race. Always stop and scrape. Make sure in the middle of mixing It gets all of the things from the bottom up to the top and incorporates everything easily. I think people tend to be made a little lazy by their stand mixers. They tend to just walk away from them. They still need to be babysat, but they are incredibly convenient. And that's the last of our dried goods. So now that we have our 3-cup zucchini grated, we're gonna fold those, as well as our walnut chunks. Now, the notes in my grandma's recipe say put these on top of the cake, but I distinctly remember the chocolate chips and the walnuts being inside of the cake. That is my childhood recollection. Whether or not that's the case, whether or not that's like the Nelson Mandela grandma chocolate zucchini effect, I don't know. But that's how we're gonna do it, because I just remember biting into the cake and having chocolate chips in it. So, and the weird thing about my memory as a child is it's generally not wrong. So we're going to go with it. And we're just going to kind of fold all of this in here by hand. Make sure everything is kind of incorporated evenly, just like everything else we do. Batter. We have one more step before we can go into the oven. So I melted a couple tablespoons of butter, and now I'm kind of getting in here, and usually you would use a pastry brush for this, but I can't find mine. It is MIA. So we're just gonna have to like improvise, like frequently do. I'm going to get that stick of butter that didn't melt out of the bun pan. Awesome. No, this is not for Monty's. And what I'm going to do is I kind of roll the butter. I don't know if you can see that. I roll the butter into all over my hands, because that's what happens when you don't have a pastry. When you don't have a pastry brush. I'm just gonna take that over here. Here it is. This one. Unfortunate occurrences. And because this is a chocolate cake, instead of dusting it with flour, we're going to use the cocoa from earlier. We're just going to kind of put a little bit here. I'm just going to give everything sit in, because we don't want that. We don't want that white residue that you get. When you use flour, you don't want that on a chocolate cake. So cocoa does pretty much the same lift that into the mud pan and risk dumping it, because let's face it, this has been a night of clumsy mistakes for me. So I'm going to use an ice cream scoop. A total ammo. I'm just going to make sure that everything gets in little cracks. It's a very thick. It's a very thick cake batter. I'm really hoping it comes out. I have not had great luck with some of my bun pans. One time I made a tunnel of fudge cake, which makes me remember from your childhood. And when I went to take it out, well, things went badly, and it became a tunnel of fudge trifle. Because that's what you do when cakes go badly, you make trifle. We're just gonna kind of like let the gravity work here for a second, like let it sit for like 5 minutes or so, and make sure that all the crooks and crevices and crannies, I mean, granted there's no way to really tell, and you're going to kind of hope that it'll swell up and fill in any of the gaps. That's the goal. And that's going to go in the oven at 350. So we have the 6-cup bun pan. We have baby bun pan 1 and baby bun pan 2. So I can share the love with the neighbors. It's going to take about 30 minutes for the big bun pan, and it's going to take about 20 minutes potentially for the little bun pans, but of course we're going to pull out toothpick check and gauge whether or not they are finished. Okay.
Right. Stop.
Yep, moment of truth.
Ooh,
That turned out really pretty.
that did. Look at that.
So I got some feedback from my father-in-law, the other Everett, in my life. And he told me he was really disappointed with my chicken pot pie video because I didn't feature any footage or reaction shot of the finished product. So this one's for you, Dad Shaw. Okay, babe. What's your feedback?
Really good.
Okay.
Very tasty. It's nice and soft on the inside. It's got a nice little crunch on the outside. Really, really good.
How are the flavors? How do they play together?
Really well. The zucchini, really interesting aftertaste. The chocolate isn't super sweet. It's semi-sweet. So it's got a nice flavor without being overly sweet. It's really, really tasty.
10-10 would eat again?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Those are really good.
Apparently, Grandma agreed with Everett because in her bottom of her recipe, on her recipe card, it said the zucchini cake was real good.